The slam of the heavy oak door echoed through the grand office, reverberating against walls lined with decades-old family portraits. Clara stood frozen, her fingers still gripping the edge of the mahogany desk where she'd just placed the termination letter. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room, but she barely noticed the golden light warming her grandmother's cherished Persian rug. "You can't be serious," Margaret's voice cut through the tense silence, sharp and disbelieving. Her 82-year-old frame seemed to shrink in the massive leather chair, though her eyes burned with a fire that belied her years. "After everything I've done for this company? For you." Clara's hand trembled as she straightened, the weight of what she'd just done pressing down on her chest like a physical force. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind during the sleepless nights leading up to her promotion, but now that it was actually happening, the reality felt surreal. The air between them crackled with unspoken history. Decades of family dinners, whispered business advice, and countless mornings spent together in this very office while Clara learned the ropes of the family empire. "I'm sorry, grandmother," Clara managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "But it's time for new leadership. Your methods, they're outdated. We need fresh ideas if we're going to compete in today's market." She watched Margaret's face carefully, searching for any sign of understanding or acceptance, but found only growing incredulity. Margaret's laughter started as a soft chuckle, low and rumbling deep in her chest. It grew louder, more manic, until it filled the entire space, bouncing off the marble floors and expensive artwork. Clara took an involuntary step back, startled by the unexpected reaction. This wasn't how she'd imagined the confrontation playing out, not that she'd expected anything straightforward from the woman who had single-handedly built their family business from a small textile operation into a global conglomerate. "You think you know better than me?" Margaret finally managed between bursts of laughter, wiping at her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief. "You, who wouldn't even exist in this position if it weren't for everything I've sacrificed. Everything I've fought for." The words hit Clara like a physical blow, forcing her to remember all the times Margaret had skipped birthdays and holidays to close deals, the nights she'd spent poring over contracts instead of tucking her grandchildren into bed. But those memories were quickly overshadowed by more recent ones: the stubborn resistance to digital transformation, the refusal to adapt marketing strategies to appeal to younger demographics, the insistence on maintaining partnerships that no longer served the company's best interests. "This isn't personal," Clara said, though both women knew it was anything but. "The board agrees with me. Your tenure has been remarkable, but we need to evolve. The shareholders demand it." Margaret's laughter subsided into a series of wheezing breaths, her expression shifting from amusement to something darker, more calculating. "Oh, Clara dear," she said, leaning forward in her chair, "you have so much to learn about this family, about this business. You think firing me is going to make things easier? Sweeter victory for you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Margaret rose slowly to her feet, using her cane with deliberate slowness. Each tap of the silver tip against the hardwood floor sounded like a warning bell. "Let me tell you something about this company you're so eager to take over. About the people who work here. About the legacy you seem determined to dismantle." Clara watched, heart pounding, as her grandmother moved toward the window, her silhouette stark against the setting sun. The laughter had transformed into something else entirely, a cold determination that sent shivers down Clara's spine. She realized with growing unease that perhaps she had underestimated just how deeply rooted Margaret was in every aspect of the business, how many alliances she had cultivated over the years. "You think you're making a clean break," Margaret continued, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "But this company? It's like a spider's web. Touch one strand, and the whole thing vibrates. Every decision I've made, every relationship I've nurtured, they're all connected. And you, my dear granddaughter, are about to find out just how tangled things can get." The finality in Margaret's tone sent a wave of doubt crashing over Clara. Had she acted too hastily? Too arrogantly? The confidence that had carried her through months of preparation for this moment began to waver as she considered the full implications of what she just set in motion. The laughter might have stopped, but the drama was only beginning. The days following that fateful confrontation unfolded like scenes from a Greek tragedy, each moment more intense than the last. Clara arrived at the office early every morning, determined to establish her authority, only to find subtle signs of resistance everywhere she turned. Department heads who had once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Files crucial for upcoming meetings mysteriously disappeared from shared drives. Whispers followed her movements through the building, hushed conversations falling silent whenever she approached. In the staff cafeteria, groups would scatter when she entered, leaving her isolated at a corner table with her coffee growing cold. Even the janitorial staff seemed to have developed an uncanny ability to finish their rounds just before she arrived in any given section of the building. The atmosphere had shifted from professional respect to something bordering on hostility, and Clara couldn't help but notice how quickly the change had taken hold after her grandmother's departure. During a particularly tense board meeting, Clara found herself struggling to maintain composure as senior executives openly questioned her decisions. "These digital initiatives," one vice president said, tapping his pen against the conference table with infuriating casualness, "they remind me of Margaret's attempts to modernize in the 90s. Remember how that ended?" The room erupted in knowing chuckles, though none dared meet Clara's eyes directly. Her assistant, Sarah, became an unwitting confidant, sharing stories that painted an increasingly complex picture of Margaret's influence. She used to bring muffins every Friday, Sarah revealed one evening, staying late to help Clara prepare for an important presentation. "Not just any muffins, your grandmother knew exactly which flavors everyone preferred. And she remembered birthdays, anniversaries, even kids' graduations. People loved her." The revelation hit Clara like a punch to the gut. She had always viewed these gestures as manipulative tactics, ways for Margaret to maintain control through emotional leverage. But hearing about them secondhand, through the eyes of those who had benefited from her grandmother's attentiveness, made them seem less calculated and more genuinely caring. One afternoon, while reviewing old client files, Clara discovered a folder labeled "Personal Connections" in Margaret's meticulously organized archives. Inside, she found detailed notes about key clients, their children's names, medical conditions, favorite sports teams. There were even sketches of seating arrangements for company events, annotated with personal preferences and potential conversation topics. The level of detail was staggering, and suddenly Clara understood why so many long-standing clients had expressed concern about Margaret's departure. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from various stakeholders, all couched in polite language but carrying the same underlying message: they missed Margaret's presence. One major supplier sent a formal letter questioning whether the company could maintain its commitments without her oversight. Another longtime partner called to express concerns about continuity, and suggested they might need to reconsider their contract. At home, the tension followed Clara like a shadow. Family gatherings became minefields of passive-aggressive comments and loaded silences. Her cousins, who had always treated her as an equal, now regarded her with a mixture of pity and resentment. During Sunday dinner at her parents' house, Aunt Patricia had clucked her tongue and said, "Your grandmother built that company with blood, sweat, and tears. And now? Well, let's just say there's talk." The media picked up on the drama quickly, thanks to carefully timed leaks that Clara suspected originated from within the company. Business journals ran pieces analyzing the transition of power, often concluding that Margaret's removal was perhaps premature. A popular business podcast devoted an entire episode to discussing whether family businesses should prioritize experience over ambition. The host, a former protégé of Margaret's, practically eulogized her mentorship style while barely acknowledging Clara's contributions. Each morning, Clara would steel herself before checking the news, dreading what fresh criticism awaited her. Social media proved equally unforgiving, with former employees and business associates taking to various platforms to share anecdotes about Margaret's generosity and leadership. Some posts were supportive, others scathing, but all contributed to a narrative that portrayed Clara as the ungrateful heir who had betrayed her family's legacy. The hardest part wasn't the public scrutiny or even the professional challenges, it was the private moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, alone in her apartment overlooking the city, Clara would stare at old photographs of herself and Margaret working side by side. In those images, she saw not just a mentor-mentee relationship, but something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. The memory of Margaret's laughter during their final confrontation haunted her, not because it had been cruel, but because it had contained an element of truth she couldn't ignore. As weeks turned into months, Clara began noticing patterns in the resistance. Certain departments operated with almost military precision in undermining her initiatives. Marketing campaigns launched without proper approval. Financial reports arrived with suspicious timing, always painting her decisions in the worst possible light. IT systems experienced mysterious glitches right before crucial presentations. Each incident alone might have been dismissed as coincidence, but together they formed a tapestry of opposition that left Clara wondering if she had misjudged not just her grandmother, but the entire foundation upon which the company rested. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after Margaret's departure. Clara sat in her office, staring at the termination letter she had written, the same letter that had sparked this cascading drama. The rain hammered against the windows, distorting the view of the city below into impressionistic swirls of gray and silver. She had just finished reading yet another email from a longtime client expressing doubts about continuing their partnership, citing concerns about the current leadership stability. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Before she could respond, Sarah entered, holding a thick manila envelope. "This just arrived for you," she said, placing it on Clara's desk. The envelope bore the distinctive seal of the company's legal department, but something about the handwriting looked familiar. Inside, Clara found a collection of documents that made her blood run cold. Contracts, signed in the weeks following Margaret's departure, containing clauses that effectively tied the company's most lucrative accounts to specific performance metrics that were impossible to meet without Margaret's extensive network of personal relationships. Partnership agreements rewritten to include termination clauses triggered by leadership changes. Supplier contracts renegotiated with terms that favored immediate profits over long-term stability, precisely the strategy Clara had been trying to reverse. The realization hit her like a freight train. Margaret hadn't just laughed at her naivety that day in the office, she had orchestrated a masterclass in corporate chess. Every move Clara had made since taking over had played directly into a trap laid years in advance. The resistance from staff, the client defections, the media backlash, they weren't random acts of loyalty to Margaret, but carefully coordinated elements of a larger strategy. Clara's hands trembled as she leafed through the documents, each page revealing another layer of her grandmother's foresight. There were letters from key executives, pledging their support to Margaret's vision for the company's future. Copies of internal memos outlining contingency plans for various scenarios of leadership change. Even a detailed analysis predicting exactly how Clara would attempt to modernize operations, complete with recommended countermeasures. The most devastating document was a personal letter from Margaret herself. Written in her elegant cursive, it read, "My dear Clara, I imagine you're feeling quite overwhelmed right now. Good. That means you're finally paying attention. You see, running a company isn't just about making bold decisions or implementing trendy strategies. It's about understanding the delicate balance of power, loyalty, and tradition that keeps an organization alive. I didn't spend 50 years building this company just to watch it crumble under the weight of someone else's ambition. These documents represent the safety net I've woven around our legacy, a net that will catch us if you prove incapable of steering this ship properly. Consider them your training wheels. Remember that laughter you found so unsettling? It wasn't mockery, child. It was the sound of someone who knows they've already won. But more importantly, it was the sound of someone who loves you enough to teach you the hard way. Love always. Grandmother." Clara sank back in her chair, the rain outside merging with the tears streaming down her face. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Margaret hadn't resisted change because she was afraid of it, she had resisted because she knew Clara wasn't ready to handle the consequences. Every battle Clara thought she was fighting against her grandmother's outdated methods had actually been a lesson in the true nature of leadership. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to prove herself as a modern leader, she had fallen victim to the very traditional power structures she sought to dismantle. Her grandmother had anticipated every move, countered every strategy, and maintained control even after being removed from her position. The laughter hadn't been about victory, it had been about patience, about waiting for Clara to reach the limits of her own understanding. Through the rain-streaked windows, Clara watched as lights flickered on in offices across the city. Somewhere in this concrete jungle, Margaret was probably enjoying a quiet evening, confident in the knowledge that her granddaughter was finally learning the most important lesson of all, that true power doesn't come from titles or positions, but from the intricate web of relationships and trust that holds an organization together. The documents spread across Clara's desk weren't just legal papers, they were a map of her grandmother's influence, a testament to decades of careful cultivation of loyalty and respect. They represented everything Clara had dismissed as outdated sentimentality, the remembered birthdays, the personalized gifts, the hours spent listening to employee concerns. These weren't just management techniques, they were the foundation upon which the entire company had been built. As the reality of her situation settled in, Clara realized that her fight wasn't against her grandmother's methods, it was against her own arrogance. She had mistaken Margaret's personal touch for weakness, her traditional approach for obsolescence. Now, faced with the evidence of how deeply ingrained these connections were in the company's success, Clara understood that modernization didn't mean erasure. True progress required building upon the past, not destroying it. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, mirroring the pattern of revelations unfolding in Clara's mind. Each drop seemed to wash away another layer of her previous certainty, exposing the raw truth beneath, that leadership wasn't about imposing one's will, but about understanding and respecting the complex ecosystem of human relationships that defined an organization. Clara reached for her phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. She needed to call someone, anyone who could help her navigate this new reality. But as she stared at the screen, she realized that the person she most wanted to speak with was the one she had tried so desperately to replace. The person who had known all along that this moment would come, who had prepared for it with characteristic thoroughness and love. For the first time since taking over the company, Clara allowed herself to truly consider what Margaret had been trying to teach her. The laughter hadn't been about triumph, it had been about faith. Faith that eventually, through struggle and failure and painful lessons, Clara would come to understand what it really meant to lead.